Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Katamari Damacy of extreme metal podcasts. I am the
yeah.
That's a classic. I am the death metal guy, aka born too late to explore the earth, born too early to explore the stars, born just in time to sodomize the holy asshole.
Whose lyric is that?
Havohe.
Nice.
Yeah, it's the spoken word track at the end of Dethrone the Son of God, where Paul Letney just, like, screeches various blasphemous things. It was going to be either sodomize the holy asshole or masturbate on the throne of Christ. Those are both pretty solid.
Yeah, it's the sensitive spoken word number. And I am the black metal guy, a.k.a. Local peasant detained by Inquisition for making small wooden image of God with, quote, too many arms and too many swords.
Well, that's the kind of God that I want to worship. Too many arms, too many swords.
Yeah, just imagine, he's, like, baffled at the idea that this isn't, like, he's like, I tried to make, look, you told me about God, he's the coolest guy that exists, right? I made a statue of him so I could worship him.
Or peasant detained by Inquisition for making sculptures of biblically accurate angels.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be pretty good.
Like, I mean, I think if, my God, imagine you're just the you're the monk. You walk into the hut and you see, like, a sculpture that's in 5 dimensions. Like you sort of, like, you sort of just collapse with a seizure.
Yeah, this whole thing's made of eyes.
The thing this really connects to is that the Candlemass song about the guy who does a virtuous work of charity and is approached by an angel. Do you remember this one?
Oh, God. That's early Candlemass, right?
Yeah, it's like the second record, I think. It's,
yeah, Off Nightfall. Yeah, well, you've talked about that one before, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's just the classic biblically accurate angel. Do not be afraid. Kind of moment.
So I had an experience recently, and I gotta ask you about it, or just have you weigh in on the topic. So I went to, like, a screamo show a couple nights ago. Really good music, and, like, a lot of it was, you know, like, really angular, kind of dissonant screamo. Not full-fledged Page 99, but getting pretty close sometimes. And the entire crowd was, like, young Zoomers or, like, borderline Gen Alpha. And all of them were hardcore dancing.
Cool.
Even during, like there was one, like, wimpy Midwest-style emo band there, and they were really good, but there were kids, like, throwing down to the, like, clean guitar spoken word passage about getting out of this shitty little dead-end town. And I'm just... Is that just how they respond to everything they like now?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that is true. Traditionally, the Midwest emo part with the spoken word bit was the part where you, like, clutched yourself and sort of swayed back and forth while sort of sobbing.
Yeah, you're supposed to think about your ex or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, you should think about your ex and how she's 3 rows behind you at the same show.
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
Ladies and gentlemen, for our first review of the night, we have something that I'm very excited to bring on the show. Quite a number of years after their second full-length record, actually. I have to pull up the year because I don't plan very well. 9 years since the last full-length record, Viscera Infest has returned with their third full-length record, Teratoma, out now on Obliteration Records. For those who aren't familiar, so Viscera Infest is a very... death metal influenced gore grind act is what I would call them, hailing from Japan, who have about a 20-year history behind them. over time, they've evolved from being just like a purely like deep-cut weirdo gore grind band that only really antisocial people would know about, to a relatively well-known band, or at least as well-known as you can be in this style, owing to, one, just putting out really good music, and two, some meme potential that surfaced a handful of years ago when some live footage of them from, I think it was called a Suka Death Fest, was revealed, with featuring people doing the cockroach mosh during the fastest blasting part. So if you've seen that video but you didn't know the band, it was Viscera Infest.
Okay, death metal guy, I've been meaning to ask you, can you explain? I tried to imagine what the cockroach mosh was, and I just imagined the band throwing cockroaches into the pit.
No, it's during the most frantic blasting sections of their music. Sometimes some of the audience goers would flop to the floor on their back and spaz their legs and hands as quickly as possible, sort of looking like a dying cockroach. I think
that's so cool.
I think it was a purely spontaneous thing that occurred, but there was video of it, and people were like, "Oh, they're doing the cockroach mosh." It's like, no, I think it was just some guys that were like drunk and spazzing out at the show because I thought it'd be fun.
Yeah, that was Masana.
yeah, it was very Masana. But yeah, so if you weren't familiar, that's Viscera Infest. Viscera Infest are also just an insanely cool and good band. They are. They're popularly understood as a band that worships Disgorge, the Mexican Disgorge in this case, particularly their first album, Chronic Corpora Infest. This is largely true, but I would say that Viscera Infest does kind of add their own flavor to the mix. They are a tighter band, a more technical band than Disgorge, an even faster band. I firmly believe that the drummer Yuya Yakushiji is one of the fastest drummers probably on the planet. Some of the blast beats you'll hear across this discography are cracking way past the 300 BPM mark. And he's not faking them either. They are traditional blast beats just delivered at 340 BPM periodically. It's so fast that watching video of it happening is impressive and funny at the same time. Your brain kind of melts trying to keep up with it. But beyond the influence from Disgorge, I think that what makes Viscera Infest special is that despite this enhanced technicality, despite the chaos, despite the speed of the music, it is rooted really heavily in old school death metal, in thrash, in little traces of crossover. There's ways to listen to Viscera Infest in which they are merely the heaviest and most extreme death thrash band of all time, which also makes their music more approachable for a lot of people than a lot of other stuff in the gore grind scene, which is noisier or so chaotic it basically falls apart. This is appreciable by someone who's primarily into old school death metal. And this continues on Teratoma, which is actually the most death metal material I've heard from the band. While there's plenty of blindingly fast, blast-oriented gore grind sections, Teratoma is primarily rooted in older styles of songwriting. This is a band that is still extremely riff-based despite its speed and chaos. And overall, I think this might be the band's finest work, and it's definitely high up in my year-end list now. I think it's just an incredibly fun record from beginning to end. It has found a novel way to push forward in the extremity arms race without sacrificing any sort of songwriting or coherency, and I think that it's really just a remarkable record to use and to show to people to maybe get them to take this style of music seriously and not merely as a sort of novelty act. But Black Metal Guy, you've got opinions about this record that I'm very excited about. What do you think of Teratoma?
Dude, this record rules.
Yeah, it does.
Really enjoyed this. Basically, the story for this is you put it on the show knowing that you knew it would be good, but you hadn't checked it out yet, right? Mm-hmm. You were like, well, obviously we need to cover Viscera Infest. And I ended up listening to, in a rare case of non-procrastination, I ended up listening to it before you. And I was just texting you about how awesome it was. And then before I'd even finished the record, and then you started listening to it and texted me back 30 seconds after you started listening to it. And yeah, I mean, we both agree this is, you know, your endless material for sure. It's been a really, this has been the year, I think, for a sort of event long prophesied by the death metal guy, which is a sort of convergence of brutal death, or the emergence of brutal death into the broader death metal ecosystem. And in terms of bands from that background making music that really speaks to people from other parts of the metal scene. And, you know, we started off with the new Brodekin, which is, you know, more accessible than the old Brodekin, but still definitely a brutal death record. And then lately we've had, you know, Carnivore de Prosopis, and now Viscera Infest. And both of these are very defiantly sort of defiantly extreme records that are nevertheless have something for people who are not just brutal death heads. This is Teratoma is an electrifyingly exciting album. It is really fast. There are a remarkable amount of change-ups without ever having the spazzy or herky-jerky quality that I dislike in some of the more gory or technical grind stuff. There is impressive continuity between all of them, in part because the drummer doesn't need to break to set up. And the guitarists don't need to break to set up, right? You don't need to, like, put a choppy fill in between things, because they can just switch. You know, they'll just switch between 3 different kinds of blast beats in a row, right? Or throw in a mid-tempo section directly off a blast beat with no setup that, like, would be impossible for a slower band to play. So it is dizzying, and yet there is a considerable amount of tempo variation. There's a lot of... It's clear these guys like coffins, and anatomia, and other sort of, maybe even some straight Savage style. There's basically this definitely has a lot of the knuckle-dragging, sort of beat-down and death doom aspects of the Japanese death metal scene. As you said, you know, you basically told me this has a big sort of undertone of thrash, and that's true. It's clear throughout in the sort of directedness of the riffing, right? A lot of it is sort of needling single string trem riffs that have a definite shape to them, and not needling in a bad way. They're very high, but they're not like sort of shrieky or drill bit. It's the very, very cool riffs, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I like the riff, and any other overall impression. I mean that's pretty. We can get into it with the samples, but yeah, I really like it. I hear the undertone of death thrash for sure, but it also is just enjoyable as what it is, which is an insane grindcore record.
I think that what Viscera...
Oh yeah, I had a question for you.
Oh, go ahead.
So, the is the death thrash aspect part of the original Disgorge formula, or is it something Viscera Infest have really brought out from that original?
I think that's more of a Viscera Infest thing. So if you listen to early Disgorge, you will hear stuff that is like similar to this in terms of like speed and chaos and heaviness and some of the riffing ideas, but Disgorge is definitely like sloppier and noisier. It has a little bit more to do with maybe South American style brutal death. Viscera Infest is a little bit more streamlined and less clunky. Now, the clunkiness of Disgorge is one of the things that makes it cool, but this is definitely just like more capable music all around.
That might be true. It's for something to truly thrash in the sort of 1-2 beat driving momentum.
It has to be
needs
tight.
a degree of clarity. Yeah. Right.
Well, I think,
otherwise, it's like Cogumelo Death Thrash, which really has a stasis to it. It's like that's like war metal chaos.
yeah, you can't really go too many places with it, which is what I think is so impressive about this record is that. I get a feeling that these guys really see Viscera Infest as part of a lineage of heavy metal. You know, they see this as a heavy metal band. You can see the guitarist Aizo Asakura, when he plays live, he's got a giant, leather armband with 6-inch nails coming out of it. He looks like a war metal guy, or like a guy from Sabat or something, which is really cool. And that's just an aesthetic thing, but I think that bears out in the music. Viscera Infest say, hey, we like old school death metal and gore grind. How do we update this without sacrificing anything? And the answer is, what if we just play those old songs really, really fast? And we'll still keep them 4 minutes long, but now we're playing them so fast we can put in twice as many riffs.
Right. There's actually a fair amount of the epic quality of heavy metal on this record, especially towards the end of it, which is what you'd expect. But there's some more. There's some more consonant melody in various places. There's gestures towards sweet death. Many of these 4-minute songs feel truly epic in scale. Like, it's hard to click through and sample, not because it's all chaotic nonsense, because it's like, shit, I thought this was a 4-minute song with 3 riffs, but it's actually a 4-minute song with 25 riffs.
And also the fact it's difficult to sample because it is shocking how in a record that relies on just neck snapping contrast so much, how elegantly these songs flow. Really in the manner of the best and sort of smoothest of early death metal. These songs flow in the way that a Deicide song off Legion flows. It's rhythmically intense. There's massive changes in tone and texture, but it never feels contrived or forced. It's really very polished in the way that you only get after guys playing together for 20 years. And this is a band that's had the same lineup the entire time for 2 decades now.
That's our last overall point before we move to the samples. Is the production on this record is insanely good.
Oh, this is right in the pocket of as good as it should sound.
Right. Well, in a way, it's it's far, quote, better than any, brutal death or gore grind production I've heard. Not sometimes I complain that it's too sterile or whatever, and, I generally tend to prefer a more noisy or raw sound with that stuff, but, this record just has the sonic depth and clarity and texture of, a modern beatdown record or something, without being overproduced. There's real bass presence, both in terms of audible bass lines and just sub-bass frequency. And there is it's 3-dimensional, and the guitar tone has sort of substance and crunch to it. There's a mid presence that is unusual with this kind of music and gives it more of a heavy metal feeling.
Yeah, really, really lovely production. And kind of to your point, it's the production doesn't need to be any grittier because the songwriting and the manner of playing itself provides that grit.
Oh yeah, it's not produced to be gritty, it's produced to be heavy. Which is an idea that often gets lost in attempts at all sorts of more extreme metal.
Yes. So with that, let's get into samples, show them how this sounds, and we're going to be lazy. We're going to go to just the beginning of the record, Macular Dystrophy, Stargard, and the opening sample is intact because this is a gore grind record and samples are cool. They are not a waste of time, and they are a very important sort of piece of breathing room on an album like this. So let's listen to this, and then I'm going to talk about where I think some of the newer influences, or perhaps like understated influences from previous records, are really coming to roost here. So, unbelievably fucking brutal. That, just, first off, that pinch harmonic riff at the end is completely insane. This album is dotted with riffs like that. So, if you're into that, you're in good company here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a big thing that I want to point out. This is, typically understood as, like, discord. Hold on one second. Sorry, Wilkins was trying to knock over a painting. Anyway, as I was saying,
moshing.
he was doing his little kitty mosh. Yes. So like I said, Viscera Infest is popularly understood as like disgorge worship, but what really comes out on this record more than anything is cryptopsy. And I think you noticed that too, right?
Yeah, it took a while for me to notice, but about halfway through the record, as the riffs start to get a little bit more elaborate and you get some more of those gothic melodies in there, I'm like, oh wait, this is what this is like None So Vile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly like the sort of most manic and grindy tracks on None So Vile. I'm thinking of stuff like Dead and Dripping, Lich Mistress, stuff like that.
Yeah, it has those two or three note alternating sort of almost like arpeggio fragment riffs.
Really ripping along the D and G strings of the guitar a lot.
Yeah, frantic, tension-raising, escalating riffs that are the setups for more elaborate riffs. But I didn't notice how those were working until I started to hear some of the more elaborate riffs, at which point I was like, oh yeah, this is all cryptopsy riffs. Yeah,
so largely this is patterned off of like cryptopsy circa None So Vile. You can also see that in the drum arrangements, where you think this is an album about blast beats at first, just like you do with Cryptopsy, but then you realize, oh, the blast beats, the really fast, grindy blast beats, are used as interstitial material that is supposed to build tension between more distinct and concrete phrases. The primary unit of drumming is not actually the blast beat, it's like the 1-2 thrash beat. Yep. So, I think that's really cool. I mean, listening to the music, it's pretty, like, self-evident. I'm not sure how much I can describe, apart from it just being sick. But, yeah, obviously every riff there is just, like, outstandingly intense. I love the sheer energy of this music, how powerful it is, how it manages to be insanely heavy, even when it's operating at a really high speed and, higher up on the fretboard. It's just, I don't know, man. Just in terms of, like, craft, this is way up there.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's very hard to point to specific moments on it just because, like, how do you do it, right? There's so many. I mean, so all of our more detailed analysis is just going to come down to, hey, man, do you remember that one part where it went, but so that pinch harmonic riff sounds like you took a riff. What?
Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
It sounds like you took a riff that had pinch harmonics in it and dropped out the rest of the riff. So it's just entirely pinch harmonics, which is really cool.
And that pinch harmonic riff, and you'll hear a lot of that across the record, that's another major component of the influence here, which I think is the band Deranged, who I've talked about a fair amount on the show. They're a big band for me. And those who aren't familiar, Deranged is a Swedish death grind band who have some musical, it's oddly minimal music, because they lean on certain musical idioms over and over again. One being these really severe, almost all pinch harmonic riffs, and another being these sort of like fluttering octave bounce things that you'll also hear on this record a lot. So I think that's really interesting, and I think that they're a band who, within extreme varieties of death metal, is starting to become appreciated as way ahead of their time in terms of some of their riffing ideas, which were highly unusual when they came out and are really just starting to bear out over the last few years.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. I think you've talked about... Yeah, I remember talking about them a few times.
You would find it insanely cool. You would get really into Deranged.
Yeah, I think I gotta dig into this, especially because I bet if I listen for it, there's probably all sorts of cool connections to other Swedish death and black metal there, too.
Yeah. Also...
Even 50... the logo does not... What?
Oh, no, I was going to say also 50% of their riffs are just like insanely fast open gallops, just dun 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 shit.
Oh,
but
nice,
with horrible
nice,
pinch harmonics too. So that's right up your alley, I think.
Yes, yeah. Someone on our last video or two said something to the effect of describe them as bitch harmonics, and I told him that in this house we respect the pinch harmonic.
I firmly agree.
Yeah, we love the pinch harmonic. We cherish the pinch harmonic. So we are going to my first sample, which really highlights the thrashisms here. We're just going to listen to the title, or I guess the title track, Teratoma. If you want to feel a little sort of. If you want to feel disgust and sadness, you can look up what those are. That's what's censored on the album cover. And this track is the thrash influence is very prominent, and you can start to hear them building a kind of melodic architecture out of these, very simple riffs. well know what's coming there.
Yeah.
They do not disappoint, is what I'll say. But man, the riff before that, that's something I could only describe as like a hyper thrash riff. The the melodic element there is purely pinch harmonics, but it has a bass in a traditional pedal point riff.
I was about to say it's the most perverse possible interpretation of a pedal point riff.
Yeah, and it doesn't stint on the actual the pure pinch harmonic riff that was on your sample before. I think they it did pedal point, but to a single string, and I think the single string was almost kind of muted or something.
Yeah.
Here, like it was less audible. Here, this is just like big, chunky, palm muted power chords, just played way faster than you would expect. Like way faster than you would expect something like that.
Well, I have kind of an interesting idea about that. Like, why is Viscera Infest able to pull off the sort of speed and tightness they do? And I think it has something to do with, like, the band setup, which is just a three-piece. I think that, these songs are written, at least to a degree, to be played in a live environment, and they're constructed with the assumption that you're not going to have to worry about two guitarists staying lined up with each other, you know? That naturally, when you've got two guitarists in a live environment, they've got to really stay close to each other. And when you're doing really tight whiplashing transitions or big tempo changes, it's hard to, even with really well-practiced guitarists, get those as tight as they sound on this record. You know, there's just always going to be a slight differential in your speed and your reaction time on some of that stuff. So I think that the tight three-piece setup really works here and allows them to pull off stuff that would be really hard to do for a bigger band.
It's also a place where the kind of austerity of the guitar parts is a plus, right? The simplicity of their shape, the fact that they're kind of, like 4 or 5 note sort of thrash pattern riffs with a part that is often kind of like a pedal point or a root note trem run, and then an embellishment, a turnaround, means that you can build sort of traditional 80s style vocal patterns around them. And often the picking in the guitar parts is not as fast as what the drummer and bassist are doing. The guitar. And that's not to knock the guitar, because it often accelerates right in time with them. It's more just that the guitar riffs often, in some ways they're really technical, because the guitar riffs often have something like 16th notes and then also clearly marked 8th notes in them.
There's a real fluidity to the way the instruments play off of each other, which is not typical in this style.
Right. Whenever we hear it, we always like to highlight bands with like crisply enunciated trem patterns and like rhythmic shifts within the picking. These guys hit it out of the park, and you'll hear riffs. Like, part of what makes the blast so fast is that the guitar will go from pure blur tremolo. It'll go from like, to like, where you can really hear it like an old school thrash 8th note groove there. But the basic chassis of the music is so solid that you could completely cut out the guitars and the record would not be outstanding in the way it is, but it would be really good drum-based noise grind.
Yeah, that would be cool.
If the bass textures are so heavy and the bass playing is so rhythmically and melodically active that if you drop the guitars, you would just have something more like a crazy Japanese noise grind record.
Yeah, like a Bukkake Violence Commando tape played on quad speed. Alrighty, so another one. Multifocal motor neuropathy. This is awesome. I like the riff. This has one of the single most stress-inducing riffs that I've ever heard in my life. Shocker, it's one of the pinch harmonic riffs, and it's awesome. But something else that's of note here is, like, so where does, like, the pure gore grind come in? Where does the carcass and associated acts come into this? Well, surprisingly, it's mostly on the slower material. People think of gore grind and they hear grind in it and they associate with blast beats, which is largely correct. But old school gore grind bands were always heavily informed by slower parts, more kind of like doom death adjacent stuff, or even just sort of like doom crusty stuff. You know, the specter of Amoebics looms long and large over the metal scene, and just a little corner of it slips into gore grind sometimes. So this is a really good example of more of their really cool fast material, but also their slow, more doomy and more traditionally gore grind material, which actually manages to keep my attention just as much as the more exciting stuff.
3, 2, 1
So, well, one real quick correction I want to make. Earlier I said this band has had the same lineup the entire time. I was completely wrong. For some reason, I was under the impression it was the same three guys, but it's actually only Izo who is there from the beginning. But Yuya, the drummer, has been with the band since 2011. He's very stable. And then Harufumi Nomiyama is the current bassist just after the past 8 years or so.
And there's something interesting about the lineup. Or were you going to say that? Or
oh, no, you go ahead.
Yeah.
I did not even realize that.
Yeah, well, he's the live bassist in Cruelty with a K, who we reviewed on a very early episode of Terminus. And Cruelty is in the tradition of, like, sort of bridging between Japanese extreme beatdown, like straight Savage style, and, like, doom death, like Coffins and whatnot.
And they've gotten, like, much bigger since we've covered them. And I think especially in the hardcore scene.
I didn't like that record that much, but I'd like to go back and listen to some of their later stuff because, yeah, they've really carved out a name for themselves now.
Also, worthy of note, looking at the old members, one of their old bassists, Hiromasa Miyoshi, is apparently in Disconformity, which is a very beatdown-oriented slam death band. So there's a lot of connections to that style present here.
Right, and you can hear it in, this goes back to what you're saying, the strength of the slow or lower mid-tempo crushing parts that dominated this section. The Ghost of Amoebics and of Autopsy and all that.
Yes. So all that's awesome. That pinch harmonic riff is probably my riff of the year. It's just one of the worst things I've ever heard. This horrible scraping fucking noise. Like, honestly, just like this would probably be album of the year if it was nothing but the pinch harmonic riffs, like, arranged end to end for like 3.5 minutes.
No, that one is the best riff on the album, I think. Like, it's so good.
It's hideous. But yeah, Viscera Infest is cool. What do you have?
Yeah, it's extremely cool. Oh, actually, this will transition fairly well. One last lineup thing to note is that the drummer plays in Zwi Mokshva, which is that's one of those LLN style names like Arka Sua. But they're a band I meant to check out more, but they're pretty cool. They're sort of like it's something you think you would hear more of. It's like Yukio Mishima samurai black metal.
Oh, that's cool.
Their record was called Bloody Remembrance of the Noble Sun.
That's tight.
And yeah, and it sounds, you can hear. It sounds like it's. I couldn't do it. It has something to do with the sterner side of French black metal. And so, yeah, definitely something for us to check out. But more than that, like, there is just experience here with a wide range of very cool extreme metal styles, and including stuff with more melody and texture and a more sort of epic scope. So, and you get to that.
I desperately hope that Yuya drums in the same way in that band.
We could only hope. Yeah, that would be sick. You just write a bunch of Seigneur Voland riffs, and then you just set the drums to kill.
Yeah, you've just got some guy doing like gravity blast behind it. I mean, why not? It would probably
why
be
not?
Sick.
That would be awesome. What Viscera Infest proves is that you can be playing on the drums. You can be playing twice as fast as the guitars, and it sounds good. But so towards the last couple, right, the very closing track is, Homage to the Mighty Ancestors, where they do a Disgorge cover. But before that, it's 2 tracks, each of which feels like the finale. They're both expansive, really cool. They sort of have the most sort of outlier riffs. The very last one, Hamimegalencephali, has the most kind of gestures towards maybe early Dismember or Swedish Black Death or the more sort of gothic Cryptopsy riffing. It's extremely cool. It has a straight up sort of 6/8 Altar of Sacrifice chug riff, which is awesome. But you can check that out on your own when you listen to the record. What I want to highlight is the fact that they have an equally good but more grindy version of that sort of climax track just before that with Guttate Psoriasis. This one gets really weird.
Yeah, what the fuck is that almost timpani song or sound at the end there?
You mean the
warbling whoa,
yeah?
whoa
I think
thing?
that's called a melodica. I think it's that thing that you have. Yeah, it has keys on it, and you blow into it. I'm pretty sure it's that or a digital imitation of it, but it's a thing used in dub, and then in some weirder post-punk. But it's like originally like a dub reggae thing.
BRB, I'm gonna get a bunch of new diseases just so these guys write songs about it.
Alright, and we are back from that Japanese gore grind explosion with a record that doesn't have anything to do with it, but that's, I feel like, the only way we could do this episode, was just pairing two things that were weird and completely different. And this is the very unexpected return by Trelldom. This is By the Shadows, out now on Prophecy Productions, which is the an excellent German label that does a lot of neo-folk and more sort of adventurous and arty metal. Some of it up our alley, some of it less so. Trelldom, this new Trelldom record definitely sounds like it belongs on Prophecy in virtue of its sort of atmospheric and proggy bent, which can be a strength or a weakness. Trelldom gets discussed on this show a fair amount because of their 90s albums. Trelldom it's not really a side project. Trelldom was in the 90s and, I guess parts of the 2000s. It was one of the main bands of Gaahl, best known as the vocalist of mid-era Gorgoroth. And we talk about Trelldom a lot on the show because of those first couple albums, and especially the one that I'm most familiar with is Till On It, the second record. And this is sort of where the lineup of the band, there's a core duo of the band, which is Gaahl and the bassist, who is Stian Karstad. And that's when he joins the band, and the band gets its kind of defining character until On It. And that, for me, is one of the benchmarks of really wild, shamanic, pagan black metal. It's a pretty early example of it, coming only a few years after the Graveland records, pretty much simultaneous with Blazebirth Hall. And it's an example of a Norse band reaching for the kind of melody and texture and folk rhythm that came to dominate pagan black metal as it emerged, basically, in the Slavic countries, in Ireland, in Australia, basically places outside Norway. Basically, pagan black metal that doesn't really sound like Burzum. And so that's kind of a benchmark record for us. And it also has quite a range of chording in it. There's sort of interesting major key ideas that still sound very intense and aggressive. So you can hear it anticipating, say, the Ukrainian bands and all that. Anyway, let's talk about Gaahl. Basically, right, if the sort of if you listen to this show, you probably know that the definitive Gorgoroth records are the first three, right? With Hat and then Pest on vocals. Gaahl era Gorgoroth may have its merits as kind of big arena black metal. I've heard various people make reasonable defenses of it, but it's not the same band, and it's not, it's when we talk about Gorgoroth in this show, we're talking about the first three records. But there is kind of a pretty common opinion. If you have if you're seriously interested in underground metal and you have good taste and whatever, there's a common opinion which is Gaahl ruined Gorgoroth. This isn't, and looking at Gaahl as a bit of a sort of
the Yoko of the band.
Yeah, the Yoko of the band, and someone who's sort of, yes, a spotlight chaser and not having to do with the serious black metal scene. And this really isn't fair either. I think if someone ruined Gorgoroth, it was clearly King of Hell who was writing the riffs and determining the artistic direction, and arguably Infernus for letting him do it. Mm-hmm. Right? Basically, Infernus just decides to take a back seat and chill for like 10 or 15 years. So if Gorgoroth was ruined, it wasn't by Gaahl per se. And Gaahl is a serious black metal musician and artist in his own right. And his output is like the definition of hit or miss. It depends a lot on a complex ratio, different factors in complex ratios with each other, like, who are his collaborators? What are they trying to do? What's he trying to do? At what level is his ego in the project, right? How much is this like a sort of, he undoubtedly has excesses that can become sort of like pretentious artist statements, right? Mm-hmm. But at other times, he brings the substance to back that up. And so for us, really, the Trelldom records are masterful. We also both really like Gaahlskagg. Mm-hmm. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I really like Gaahlskagg.
Gaahlskagg is awesome. We'll throw some on at the end of this episode. It's basically pagan cybergrind, would be a way of putting it. It's sort of industrialized pagan black metal. It sounds sort of... it's a lot like Impaled Nazarene, but with a bit of a more Norwegian character and a kind of noble reserve to it. It's very cold. Impaled Nazarene isn't cold, right? Yeah. Those are like hot, fast, mid-heavy riffs. Gaahlskagg is very cold and austere. But But so Gaahlskagg and Trelldom we like a lot, and other than that, I think I love the early stuff by Wardruna. I think is great, and Gaal was an important part of the band at that time. Wardruna has since gotten a little bit closer to all the horrible sort of cosplay Viking music made by their imitators.
Yeah.
But Gaal was there for the earliest stuff, which is more like sort of music, creative folk anthropology plus like martial industrial and stuff. And it's really cool. So he's been involved in a lot of cool stuff. Now the question is this comeback record by Trelldom worthy of that legacy? What we'll say is, as you might guess, we, especially the death metal guy, but both of us, I think, have some reservations about that. I think in order, I want to turn it over to you, but I feel like I need to do a little more setup.
I mean, it's up to you.
You know what? Actually, you should state your overall feeling about the record, and then I'll try to make a case for it, or at least the concept of it.
So this year, something really interesting happened. A record came out by a set of musicians best known for their work in highly influential black metal bands, and they released something on the side that kind of took us by surprise. It was sort of a combination of like a little bit of black metal, but some goth and some prog and some post-punk and some ambient and even some folk, and the result was really excellent. And while it might not be what we expected given the personnel involved, it is an excellent record in its own right, regardless of whether it's metal or not. That record was the self-titled debut of Hauntologist. Completely unrelated to this review, the Trelldom record sucks. I've been sitting on that one for a week.
Yeah.
It's, I think it's basically bad, but it's not even that it's incompetent. There's just barely anything here to hang on to. This sounds like not improvisational, but based off of jam sessions, and it sounds like it was written quickly. The whole thing sounds underwritten. There's a lot of passages that seem like little more than their own archetype. It's like, we're doing the clean guitar part with spoken word and some weird sounds in the background. We're doing the kind of black metal riff part. It's, this is so thin, it's like nearly translucent to me. This is an effervescent record. Very little happens of consequence. Calling it bad is almost saying too much. There's very little here, I feel.
Yeah, I think I've thought about this. I think you're like, I've given it a couple passes. I think basically this is a record that really wants to be put on in the background so that you hear the concept of the record.
Yeah.
And the stylistic conceit. And I think as a certain kind of, sort of brooding and sophisticated background music. This is the kind of thing you put on when you want to feel sort of brooding and sophisticated. And look, I can respect that. I listen to neo-folk. But like but it really does not want to be looked at under a microscope, which is unfortunately what we do on this show.
Yeah.
And the more I would say that this record conceptually hangs together remarkably well, but the more that you look at the individual parts, it's as you say, woefully underwritten. It does sound jammed. Let's get into it. So, conceptually, like, I think this kind of makes sense. So, a lot of people are saying, I really don't see how this connects to the earlier Trelldom stuff. And, you know, it actually does. From coming at it from another angle, you could say, okay, this is just some fucking stupid black jazz record, right? And there's like a million bands at this point doing black jazz, doom jazz, whatever, and it's obviously a gimmick. You don't need to listen to any of them. And so there's a question like, okay, why pay attention to this version of it? And I think the reason basically is it's being presented as another version of Trelldom, right? Mm-hmm. And so the conceit is this has something to do with their 90s records, and it's worth listening. It was interesting to me to listen. I think many people say it has nothing to do with it. I actually think there is a meaningful connection here. And let's listen to a sample of the old stuff. This is the second track on Till at Ane. This is Slav till en kommende natt. Okay, so you've not really listened to the old Trelldom stuff, right?
Oh, no, I have. I've listened to the first two. I mean, it's not regular listening, but I've heard them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're familiar with this. So then, like, I mean, I guess what I wanted to flag was the thing that stands out, I would think, is the rhythms.
Yeah, that loping, kind of cleaned up Graveland stuff.
Yeah, and it's cleaned up, but it's also it's played with far crisper musicianship, and it's a lot more varied. They're doing sort of complex time signature stuff that I don't totally understand. I just know that you can pat your foot along to it without losing track. Mm-hmm. There's interesting quick change-ups. There's lots of action on the toms and, bass drum flam. It's kind of a mid-tempo drummer band, which is an unusual thing. the drums, you basically big booming pagan war drums, and yeah, like the Graveland concept, but executed with a lot more musicianship. And the rhythms have this kind of where Graveland has this sort of like loping forward momentum. Trelldom has this kind of dance-like circuity to it. The rhythmic lines all sort of like loop back on themselves in interesting ways, and it gives the guitars a sort of churning, swirling feel. It's not exactly driving. The music sort of sway. There's a lot of energy, but it's sort of contained in a way that sways. And then, there are moments where it blasts and they release there. The other important part is Gaahl in top form on vocals. Right? Yeah. Extremely theatrical vocals that where you can really hear him approximating, an Odinic, a priest of Odin or something. He sounds possessed. So I think the thing that this is, By the Shadows is not by any means a heavy record. It lacks the muscle that defines Trelldom. But there is an important rhythmic continuity, I think. And those sort of, that sort of circulating energy is translated here into, it's like brought out of the old Trelldom records and connected to the kind of circular movement you might get on a free jazz record. So let's listen to just the first. Yeah, we're gonna be lazy again. We're gonna listen to the first track, but about a minute and 37 seconds in. So after the song has had a little time to coalesce. So, even under that big noise build-up there, that sort of circulating triplet off-time pulse continues. And there's a kind of, there's a openness and restlessness to it that has 1 foot in jazz and 1 foot in... The restlessness has something to do with Trelldom, and the openness of it has something to do with jazz. You get, like, similar rhythmic ideas on... I really like Extensions by McCoy Tyner. I think Extensions is the record name. But, like, that's a record that's just temporally organized, very unlike anything I usually listen to. It sort of has this circular motion to it, like ripples expanding or something. Mm-hmm. And Trelldom, for a black metal band, was closer to that than one might think, despite having a very different mood. And on this, it really just embraces that kind of all the eccentricity of the rhythmic ideas in the old stuff and links it to this sort of free jazz tradition. And, you know, there's all sorts of jazz that, like, doesn't go with black metal, but I actually think they've done a pretty good job stylistically here. Like, the kind of ideas, yeah, they're coming from, like, the more abrasive sort of abrasive sort of droney free jazz stuff, which is at the root of extreme music, right? It was a big influence on the Stooges, say, and, you know, it has a kind of rooted quality. It's, you know, the free jazz was sort of like black nationalist stuff in a way that parallels the nationalism of black metal. But the and more than that, it has a and there's also like a Scandinavian jazz tradition, some of which is, if you're like a real jazz guy, you might find it too white or something.
Yeah, there's a bunch of like Norwegian jazz, right?
Yeah, there's the EMI record label, and a lot of that is sort of jazz-based but verging on ambient music. It feels very Scandinavian and cold. Mm-hmm. Jan Garbarek is, I think, the number one, basically the best example of that. His stuff is very folky, it basically isn't jazz anymore. It's like folk music played with, like avant folk music played with the saxophone as this kind of weird horn instrument, and... You know, he has an album called I Took Up the Runes.
Right? Oh, that's cool.
So, yeah. So you can hear all those influences here, but...
I'm coming in?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, well, no, I was, well, before you did the but, I was about to say, black metal guy, I'm afraid I have to accuse you of an excess of charitability. I think you're overall being very charitable to this record, which may be... Well, I mean, it might be a positive impulse, but, like, I think you're burying the lead a little bit.
Well, we put some of the lead up front. I mean, I think, basically, look, this is where I think everything you wrote in the notes is also right. I think there's something to what they're trying to do here, and I think that, in principle, it's cool. But a record has to be something more than a stylistic statement. No, I think the stylistic statement coheres and is interesting, but I don't think it delivers much beyond that.
No, I think the stylistic statement coheres, and I think it does belong to a lineage of artistic ideas. I think it's just a lineage that sucks. I think it's I think it is the lineage of, like, numerous black metal musicians historically getting, like, I don't know if it's tired of black metal or too big for their britches or just, like, under the impression that they naturally have something to say in a different musical idiom, and they all seem to swirl around this sort of thing. It's like a little bit black metal and proggy and jazzy and ambient. It's striking how many big-name black metal musicians have decided to evolve in exactly the same direction. It's fucking curious to me.
And especially from Norway.
Yeah, and I think it points to some sort of weird insecurity. I mean, the fact that Gaahl is doing his own admittedly stripped down and different textural interpretation of the same fucking thing Isan ended up doing is worthy of pause. Like, why are so many guys inclined to do this? Or better yet, this is the worst moments of Grand Declaration of War. An album that I genuinely enjoy a lot, but is brimming with missteps along the way. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's bizarre. And I think that in its sort of relentless pursuit of openness and creativity, we end up at something, like, surprisingly predictable. You know what I mean?
It does sound like something that could have come out in the early 2000s.
Yeah, there's something about this that just strikes me as, like, well-worn territory, and yet every time it comes out, people act as though it's something new. And I'm not saying you're doing that, but I'm saying a lot of the audience is.
Yeah, the genre, the style. I think the interesting thing to me is the attempt at making this continuous with Trelldom. Right. That's the part that's interesting to me.
That's fair. I guess that is an interesting aspect, but I guess I don't really have much of a dog in that fight. It's like...
Yeah, well, it only matters so much, right? It's if you're a fan of the band, it's conceptually interesting, but if the rest of it, if what comes out of it is also very close to, like, the sort of wanky prog exercises of aging black metal musicians, then, well, it has the concept has not been successfully executed.
Yeah. So let me get to a sample. So Exit Existence. So whenever you have one of these records, I'm going to say it's one of those. There always has to be momentary gestures toward black metal. And the starting riff on this sample off Exit Existence is a black metal riff. It's not a particularly good or interesting one, but it's a kind of sophisticated melodic black metal riff. And I let it play for a little bit. It's fine. It's inoffensive. What's offensive is what comes after. I've come to the conclusion that when a metal band starts incorporating saxophone, that's just the canary in the coal mine for them running out of ideas. It sucks. It's on this record regularly, and it always sucks. And basically every metal band outside of Naked City that's incorporated a saxophone extensively has sucked, and this is a trend that will continue to suck until the Earth falls into the sun.
Hey, buddy, you liked the Gandod record with saxophone on it.
Yeah, but Gandod are like... I don't know. They're such hermetic weirdos, and they really... You know what it is? They use the saxophone in a way that, like, blends with the riffing. You know?
The riffing on it is not jazzy.
Yeah, they use it as a... They use the saxophone as a melodic device. They're not doing free jazz freakouts. with the saxophone when they incorporate it. So I would say that they're the exception that basically proves the rule that unless you're as good as Gyendod, you can't incorporate a saxophone, and almost nobody's as good as Gyendod. Starter pack black metal riff up front, got the half-step Norwegian dissension and everything. It's fine. It's serviceable. Then, what do we get? Big, shiny, clean guitar part. Boring major key arpeggios with a bunch of, skronky jazz stuff occurring in the other channel. It sucks. Gaahl comes out.
It's like a jazz fusion thing.
Yeah, it's very fusiony. It's bad Steely Dan. Gaahl comes in to warble. Gaahl is, on this record, but might as well not be, because he's just coming in to do, half-spoken word warbling that I'm sure, having seen enough of Gaahl speaking, that he thought was this powerful trance-inducing experience. It's not. He just sounds kind of bored or sleepy across the album, which I wouldn't expect anything different. I wasn't expecting big black metal vocals or anything. Well, I was before I heard the first 30 seconds of the record, because I thought it was going to be a black metal album. Yeah, but really more to the point is how all these gestures are stock. We got the black metal part, we've got the sort of simpering clean guitar part, and then we've got the climax, which is a saxophone freakout. All of these just seem like stamped out in a fucking factory somewhere. Which is weird, because this is a record that is trying its absolute best to sound weird and avant-garde. But it has come out sounding weird and avant-garde exactly in the way this kind of record always does. Which is underwritten, parts just sort of start and stop of their own volition and not in a cool grindy way. There's little to no effort made to really construct as any sort of meaningful narrative within the songs. They just kind of happen and then they leave, and it's deeply unmemorable. Is the other accusation that I would level at it. When you hear a melody on this record, the moment it passes, you have forgotten about it. No context is built. Everything just kind of sits there for a moment and disappears.
Yeah, well, on that note, I think just, again, stylistically, I'm willing to buy the free jazz freak-out saxophone on this record.
Really?
To me, it makes, if they had written a Norwegian black metal record and thrown in free jazz saxophone freak-out, of course, it would not sit well with me. But they're doing this kind of atmospheric, jazzy thing. I think, and again, it sounds more like the right kind of saxophone playing for this kind of music. Whereas when other bands do it, it often sounds like Kenny G. Mm-hmm. It's smooth jazz,
crooning,
sentimental, like White Ward or whatever crap. And it often sounds like bluesy or whatever. This is more towar's the noisy side. I don't know, maybe I'm mischaracterizing White Ward, but I don't care about that.
No, White Ward sucks, it's fine.
It has this has the most. I think these aspects of jazz work in this context, I think. But here's the kicker. I feel like they're missing important aspects of it. Which is the constructive aspect of improvisation. Right? These guys, they were smart enough, they knew enough to be okay, saxophonist, you've got to sell this as something that has something to do with sort of trance-inducing pagan goth rock, right? So you just do the crazy freak out stuff all the time and make noise. That's part of it, but the other part of improvisation is the constructive aspect, which is using these sort of, what might be sort of, you start with a scribbly, almost random phrase, and then you build from that, right? Mm-hmm. You're making melodic ideas in real time, and that's kind of the challenge of it, and the fun of it, and the interest for the listener. And that's true of even even shit like Alvin Ailey has that. The masters of aggressive jazz all still improvised. And this does sound a lot more like random freakouts all the time, which has, the chromaticism frees it up from sounding too bluesy or croonery, but it also is just notes, right? It's just some sounds. And so a lot of they're not really taking advantage of those aspects of the jazz format in either the saxophone stuff or the guitar. And here, and there's that also speaks to what's going on with the vocals, right? Like, the vocals are just, you could hear, like, the vocals seem to all just be like phrases that sounded cool to Gaahl. And he probably had like 12 of them ready to go when he entered the studio. And he sort of like cut and pasted them together. Those could be starting points, right? If he was then to just do some really crazy, elaborate vocals. But he's not. He is, as you say, just crooning and warbling. So here's a track where I think that has... this is one of the more substantial tracks. This one has a genuinely cool Gaahl title, which is sort of scrambling the image of Odin taking Mimir's skull. This is I Drink Out of My Head, right? That's cool. That's very Trelldom. That's a good song title, image fragment. And this one has a pretty compelling core melodic idea and some weird character, but, the problems will persist. Let's start at the beginning.
That main melody is actually more Secret Agent Man than any of the Secret Agent Man riffs we've pointed out before.
That is yes, it is extremely Secret Agent Man. It feels... That has it has the problem of a lot of the more dark jazz, which is that it feels kind of noir, rather than like... It doesn't feel sort of sinister or, pagan or satanic or ancient. It just sounds like sort of like a black and white movie.
I mean, that's kind of in key. I personally think that the whole like doom jazz thing is like a failure from the jump.
Oh,
like that style,
for sure.
Like as a whole.
No, it's utterly a bad idea. But I even mean within jazz itself. Mm-hmm. Like if you're listening to sort of darker or more rock or prog influenced jazz, right? There's stuff that verges on Zoil or whatever, and some of that's like kind of cool, but often the sense of melody that comes up is just, if you're someone who's steeped in various kinds of minor key melodies from metal, the sense of the jazz's sense of what a dark melody is often quite hokey.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's like it's a black and white movie with a guy in sunglasses and a trench coat, right? Jazz is in many ways stuck in a 20th century urbanity as its imaginary, which is like not, it has nothing to do with the music that we're talking about on this show.
Certainly, yeah.
So the at its best, the jazzy parts here sound like sort of primal free jazz. At its worst, they sound like Secret Agent Man. That is undoubtedly a memorable and kind of interesting effect for this record. That's one of the more riffy ideas. You have the guitar going and the It is memorable. It is active. There's a definite thing going on there, but it also does just sound goofy, right? You can't avoid the goofiness of starting with. It's like the Nuit Noir vocal.
Yeah,
the guy doing the little fairy voice. So it's weird. So there's something going on here compositionally, but there's like a taste problem, and and you get this, and this gets to the guitars here, right? The core guitar.
It's funny, just to sorry to jump in, but it's like, it's weird, but like paradoxically, like the failure of the melody like actually reifies like their authentic jazz priors. They're fucking it up in the way that actual jazz musicians would fuck it up.
Exactly. Like it's goofy in the way that a lot of jazz is goofy, right?
Yes.
It's like, it has the circus music thing going for it too, right? But as someone has surprised the elephant.
Oh no!
but it's but like this gets to the guitar riff, right? The guitar, there's more going on in the guitar here than a lot of the record. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, that's like a serviceable. I mean, in its architecture, this whole record is a goth rock record.
Yes.
And just like a passable one, right? So it's like a passable goth rock riff. Or maybe even a noise rock riff, right? A lot of the guitar at its heaviest sounds like Unsane.
Yes.
But some problems here. One, the timbre of the guitar.
I was about to say that.
Jazzy. This whole record would go from like a, D plus or C minus. It would go up like a letter grade if they just kept the guitar settings exactly the same as they had them on the old Trelldom records.
Yes. This guitar tone is way too jangly and brittle to stand up to the heavier riffs they're attempting to play.
You could take everything about this record with all the sort of thinness of the writing and errors of taste, and if you just gave it a Trelldom guitar tone and you had Gaahl do the screamy voice, it would be, in addition to his clean vocals, it would be far better. It would instantly be the best. In many ways, this is I sort of was charitable to this because it is, I think, the best execution of this idea I've heard, but it's still not a successful execution of it. And if they had just kept the metal guitar tone and the metal vocals, it would have been the most successful execution of this idea, and it might have been even worth a listen.
Yeah, and I would argue that if this is the most successful articulation of the idea this many years in, the idea needs to be abandoned.